Welcome back. I see many new faces and many people from yesterday are there. When I was looking at the list of the participants, I was very happy to see the diversity of the participation. Number of organizations people are coming from, and this is very good sign for the center, new center starting in this field. There are people coming from Ambedkar International Mission, there are people coming from Ambedkar Association of North America. There is a friend who is coming, Ambedkar International Center, Indian Theological Seminary, The people from AID are there, Boston Study Groups are there, and the universities. We have friends from Yale, we have friends from Harvard, we have friends from Brandeis, we have Brandeis faculty and students. So good competition actually, and there are, at least I see there are 4 countries actually. Of course we have people from India, we have some friends who are coming now from Pakistan, we have friends from Bangladesh, we had a friend yesterday from Nepal. So I consider these ideas about what this operation is, caste-based operation is, and how that operation can be ended actually, these ideas going far and wide. So I welcome you on behalf of the Center, Global Development and Sustainability Center, to this symposium, the first symposium of the center. On this occasion, I would like to make 2 quick points. You know that one of the biggest problems of the oppressed is they do not have access to the academy and the media. The places where the ideas are generated, the places where ideas are propagated actually. And there is this disconnect between the social movements and academia. Either the agenda of the oppressed is not discussed, or when it is discussed, the agenda is set by someone, either diluted agenda or agenda is moderated. And therefore, this kind of disconnect or mistrust is there between social movements and academia. I am very happy that the center has started this and has made a very welcome departure from this experience actually. I must congratulate the center and its head, Professor Laurie Simon. A great applause for him actually. The second point I would like to make is, this academic discourse, discussions, speeches, presentations. We generate a lot of knowledge, we get a lot of information, data. This is good. My philosopher friends will say that this is good actually. People should live only for that in fact actually. It has its value in itself actually. There are aids in itself actually. This is good. I agree with that. But when you talk with the people there in India who are suffering actually, who are suffering operation day to day basis, they are happy when you talk with them. You tell them these events are happening. They say, oh, it's great. Why they are happy? They are not happy because these events are in themselves. They are happy because they have a hope. They have a hope that these events will create some change on the ground, will make some change in their lives actually, end their operation. I think that is the hope. And I think that is the hope that I have actually as a representative of the social movement, that we will translate these ideas into action. Thank you. Welcome.
It's my pleasure to introduce the speakers at the first session this morning. And let's get the right slide up here. As Professor Sampath mentioned, the first session is entitled The Political and Philosophical Roots of Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste and Its Significance for Addressing Social Exclusion in Contemporary Democratic India. So it's my pleasure to welcome Raj Sampath to the podium to give our first address. Just a reflection about Raj. I first met Raj when I was on sabbatical from Brandeis and working at the new Google Foundation, google.org. And my first or second day, I think it is, this fellow comes walking into my office at Google and starts talking to me. And I was really already used to very smart people coming into my office and talking, but in the first 5 minutes, I think he started to give me a lesson on something like the philosophy as phenomenological ontology, and it was something like that, Raj. I don't remember exactly, but so I realized, wow, you know, instead of bringing home after my sabbatical a Google sweatshirt, I had to bring Raj back to Brandeis. So, it took a while, and we had a university search committee for a new professor in philosophy, ethics, and human rights. And the search committee, after rigorous international search, recommended Raj to become our new assistant professor. Raj came to California from India as a young child. Were you an infant or how old were you?
3 months old.
3 months old, okay, so. A few years later, just a few years, I don't think it was the standard age to get a PhD, but he completed his PhD at the University of California, Irvine, in the humanities, where he studied under the French philosopher Jacques Derrida, the founder of deconstruction. Subsequently, he did a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of California, Berkeley, and a German academic exchange service research scientist fellowship where he published articles in continental European philosophy. Then from 2006 through 2009, he was an adjunct lecturer at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and continued to serve on the Provost Council for College 8, kind of an odd designation that they have there, but College 8 at the university until June 2012. His current research interests and disciplinary expertise include 20th century Anglo-American and European moral and political philosophy, theories of modernization and social historical change, epistemology and the sociology of knowledge and comparative religious studies, and comparisons of Western philosophy and traditional African, Indian, and Chinese philosophy. Raj is one of the co-founders of our Center for Global Development and Sustainability, and he is the lead investigator of the program that we are here to talk about, but a much broader program on social exclusion. So it's my pleasure, Raj, to welcome you.
Thank you, Larry. I have to say, when I met Larry, I was struck by the fact that I was meeting a figure in the world of development and development institutions and the field of development who, and the first attribute that struck me about Larry is that he was a philosopher. And my colleague, Professor Andreas Toy, would agree that it's rare for us to feel a genuine connection to an individual that may not be trained in philosophy, but to us represents inherently a philosophical view on life and his own work. So thank you, Larry. I'm going to keep my remarks brief because I'm very much looking forward to hearing from my colleagues, and that's why I'm going to bring this down and maybe I can just move this so I don't need to worry about seeing it in the background. Images, okay, good. There we go. So as I mentioned, I'd like to keep my remarks relatively brief. I'm going to do a general overview of a particular sociologist who many consider to be the founding figure in sociology, Emil Durkheim. I'll talk about a little bit of his context and why I think a few quotes from his seminal work, The Elementary Forms of the Religious Life, can help us frame an analysis of the annihilation of caste. So I'm going to go back in time and try to recover a sociologist who did look at comparative religions per se, but in this particular work he wasn't identifying a particular religion like Hinduism. He was discussing what he called the primitive religions in humanity that he thought were not just back there in the past, but have relevance today when we try to understand the relationship between society and some of the major world religions, like India and Hinduism. So for me, Durkheim gives us a way to go inside Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste and really examine its philosophical roots. We were all inspired by Dr. Thorat's presentation yesterday, and what we were just discussing is that many of us know the legal history and the great economist and the great social theorist and arguably the framer of every aspect of Indian society, if it were bereft of the caste system and the intrinsic inequality that is manifesting in caste. But there is no single figure that I can think of in the 20th century that represents, arguably the single most influential theoretical and conceptual analysis of what a future Indian society could look like, and that would be Dr. Medikar. We should acknowledge that there are major academic, scholarly works in the 20th century that examine caste. Dr. Thorpe mentioned that Medikar himself, with his PhD dissertation in 1915, Dr. Thorpe, or was it 1905? The PhD dissertation.
No, 16.
16. At Columbia University, in which his mentor was a philosopher, James Dewey. So Medikar does represent, obviously, one of the first voices to give us the conceptual analysis of caste. The Indian sociologist from the South, M. Srinivasan, would be another figure that is duly noted. And from the European context, the text that most people point to start the conversation today is Louis Dumont's Homo Hierarchicus from the commencement of the 60s. More to our time and in the contemporary period, Wendy Doniger's work at the University of Chicago has gotten quite a bit of acclaim, and also bitter critique from some of the right-wing Hindu fundamentalists in India. She attempted what some may consider the first people's, if you will, going on Howard Zinn's phrase, people's history of Hinduism, a subaltern view, a non-Brahmanic view that doesn't come from the top, and Brahman males. So she looked at the subaltern voices, women, sexuality, alternative sexuality, and certainly the lower caste, to say that there's a whole other way to think about this tradition. So there is a general landscape, if you will, in the 20th century, of different figures that have explored caste in remarkably innovative ways. But as I mentioned, I would like to turn to Emile Durkheim, and I can bring my text back up, to really rethink even given this amazing legacy, including Ambedkar's work himself, is to try and find conceptual resources from other traditions that could help us analyze the nature of the caste system in India today and the prospects for its the transformation of Indian society, so we can alleviate the society from some of its intrinsic inequalities. Here are some seminal sort of articulations from Durkheim about the connection between society and religion in general. I was really struck by some of these quotes because here we are living in the 21st century, and some of us may have some preconceptions of what is society, what is religion, how does religion function in society, how is society's aspirations manifest in religion. We may come up with all kinds of propositional constructions that relate society and religion. So one of Durkheim's first definitions is that society is a reality sui generis. What does that mean? It's something. It is a thing. It's self-generating. Society creates itself. It doesn't come from nothing, and it can't come from a single point. No individual has created a whole society, maybe in a fictional novel like Thomas More's Utopia, but in reality, society is something, but it's generating itself. That's very interesting. Another quote that struck me from his work, which is over 400 pages long, the idea of society is the soul of religion. We're going to have to look very carefully at that, because normally we can think of the inversion. I'll get back to that. For example, many people might say a religion is the soul of a society. A religion expresses the moral system of a society or its aspirations. What is he saying? Society is the soul of a religion? Normally we think that religious conceptions aim at expressing the supernatural or the exceptional or the abnormal, God itself, something beyond human comprehension, the ineffable. That's what we think of religions. We think of mysteries and miracles and the supernatural. But he's saying no. Religious conceptions aim to regulate and provide what's constant. Religion, in many cases, is something normal and boring and everyday, as if it's imbricated in the structures of everyday life in society. Let's say a society that's built on a system of oppression and perpetuates the status quo. Religion, what's so extraordinary and exceptional about that? It's as mundane as a system of apartheid or banality of a cruel system of separated hierarchy and inequality where there's no movement and escape. As I say, The ideal society is not, as Durkheim says, the ideal society is not outside of a real society. It's a part of it. So if religion tries to conceptualize the ideal, and even an ideal society based on some system of pure justice, the fact of the matter is that it's part of everyday life. So the ideal aspirations are built into the real society. Again, we can contrast this with religion is the soul of society. Most people might say a religion expresses the moral principles, the ideas of human compassion and justice and a response to suffering in a society. Religion is what allows us to ameliorate the suffering that comes from the human condition. Most believers in religion say that it expresses principles of mercy and justice. Examples can include liberation theology in Latin America, black theology in the history of the African American experience, Tibetan Buddhism, or Islamic states that want a different version beyond the Western liberal, secular, democratic model and or Eastern atheistic communism. That there are attempts by societies to build religion into their world precisely to alleviate suffering, to uplift the poor, or to administer justice, or to account for suffering. Religion is the soul of society, but Durkheim is saying that the society is the soul of religion. It's the inverse of what we normally think. My hypothesis is that when Durkheim speaks of this inverse, he seems to be thinking about, or at least we can think with him, about a society that is different from the previous examples I just mentioned. Examining a society can actually tell us about something about the nature of the religion, not the other way around. In contemplating the legacy of Ambedkar, I would argue that his maxims, the quotes that we just saw, is no more true of a society than Indian society and its religion of Hinduism. So a couple more principles from Durkheim, and then we'll move to analysis of the annihilation of caste. Another one of the elementary forms that go into a religion, what Durkheim called primitive religions. So not per se the world religions that exist today, but generically speaking, what he thought way back in time, whatever religion is, and society is what human beings first entered into and began to develop a consciousness of themselves. And if the society is a soul religion, well, there's some basic elements that have to go into this society. One of which is the sacred and the profane distinction. Most religions have this distinction built into it. But for Durkheim, it's not what you think it might be. It's not what the ordinary definition of the sacred is. It's not about defining what is good or beautiful or transcendent and saying it's sacred or holy. But it's this constant attempt to forbid and to contain and to dominate and to destroy what is impure, demonic, untouchable, which constantly threatens what is always a self-justifying privilege of holiness and purity. So we're trying to move in this direction of the caste system and Brahmanism, the self-justifying privilege of holiness and purity. Not based on metaphysical concepts of what is good or beautiful or transcendent, but you can only create what is pure and sacred in contrast or in domination or in control of something other, which is demonic and impure. Okay, two more principles, and then we can move to the analysis of caste. Rights and beliefs. Beliefs. I believe in God. I believe in Jesus Christ. He's the Son of God incarnate that lived 2,000 years ago as part of a metaphysical trinity. And we're expecting his return. That's a belief of something beyond us. I can't see that. Allah is ineffable and has many names and is truly omnipotent and omniscient and infinite. So is Hashem, the God of the Hebrew Bible. Something beyond the human, but sort of directly relates to us. For the primitive religions, Durkheim would say, we're not talking about beliefs as linguistic or pictorial representations of an otherwise non-representable higher sphere, whatever we think of God. Beliefs, and the early beliefs, in their primitive state were declarations that supported physical rights and practices. So the distinction between beliefs and practices and rights are rather blurry. Belief could be, in a mature or advanced religion, a belief in some metaphysical or logical or abstract concept of God. And the rites that you build around a religion to adore that God could manifest in certain practices that a community repeats. Let's say the Eucharist for the Catholic Mass. But here we're talking, in the primitive state, we're talking about beliefs as physical rites. But rites are not concepts. And just like rules in a society, as Ambedkar is going to say in Annihilation and Caste, are not principles. They're just things that occur and repeat themselves out of habit. They can't justify their own meaning. For example, rites of incessant purification against pollution then becomes a means and an end to themselves. The right to incessant purification becomes a belief. Okay, so that's one piece. And then the last piece, before we move to our analysis of caste, is someone keeping time? Ready?
Don't be back.
1 minute?
That's
No,
it.
no, you're,
1 minute.
you got,
Sure, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. I'll be done in 30 seconds.
you got 7 minutes left.
7 minutes, thank you.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so the last piece, this to me is quite fascinating in his elementary forms of the religious life. The soul, spirit, body, it's not a trichotomy because he actually speaks of what's called a double notion. I'll get into that. In a double, meaning a soul, spirit, duplicity in relationship to the body. But here's the quote. There's a discrepancy, a logical and psychological gap between the idea of a double, which I'll explain, set free. The soul free from the body after death, and that of the spirit that becomes the object of a cult. What is he saying there? If you look at the actual place where this sentence is, the section in the elementary forms, section towards the end, where he's discussing this text, what he's essentially saying is that in most primitive societies, if you don't have a sense of explanation of what a dream state is, you might link it up to something that is clairvoyantly taking you to something beyond, or something mythological, or it's a mystical experience. But it's not something you explain in modern terms, let's say through neuroscience or even psychoanalysis, in terms of the theory of the unconscious. The primitive idea is that, well, in the dream state, when we all fall asleep, while we're alive, because most of us wake up from our sleep and we're still alive, but in the dream state, the self that's running around there, this amorphous, inchoate, fragmented thing that's suddenly in Paris, but then at the Eller School, and then suddenly on the bus, coming to Brandeis, but you're out of money, and then the chaos that occurs in a dream that is illogical. For Durkheim, this is really sort of this experience of a soul detached from a body. Naturally, once you awaken, you leave the dream state, and this soul that was detached from the body is reunified, and everything is okay, for most people. But at death of the physical body, the assumption is that this soul will start to wander and perhaps enter another body. So think about the origins of the doctrine of transmigration. Of course there are doctrines of transmigration outside of Hinduism. We can turn to the Egyptian Book of the Dead. We can find this in some of the works of Plato. So this isn't specific to Hinduism, although Hinduism will build a whole architecture of the doctrine. But just think about the idea of the soul that wanders, leaving a body, coming back to a body. Where does that idea come? What is that idea, and why did it take hold in a particular religious doctrine? In this case, we're going to be speaking about Hinduism. This entire primitive concept is distinct from an idea of spirit. Spirit distinct from a soul attached to a body or detached. The spirit is something that is a new concept of soul. That's the thing that becomes an object of religious worship. I don't want to use Christianity as the only example, but the Holy Spirit, for example, I wouldn't call it an object, but it's certainly a dimension of the divine that allows us to adore or to deify or to be inspired by it. But when we think of something like the Holy Spirit, we don't think about a dream state of a soul attached from, let's say, your body or mine, sitting on a bus somewhere, getting lost and wondering if they'll ever wake up from a recurring nightmare. So the distinction between soul and spirit. Here's my thesis. Caste is the imprisonment of this wandering soul in which at any given time, the body that finds itself is made to suffer unthinkable, punitive measures. So that's my conceptualization. In the case of the Dalits, the suffering takes on inhumane and immoral proportions at the hand of otherwise privilege, of others whose privilege derives from the pure accident of birth. Birth is an accident. It's not something predestined, despite what the doctrine of transmigration might say. But for most of us, we couldn't control the fact that we were born at this time, in this place, in this body, as this sex or sexual orientation, or this race or ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera. We weren't in control of that. But, sorry. In the case of caste, given some of these elements from the elementary forms of religious life, the caste is the imprisonment of this wandering soul. It's an attempt to contain it in a body, and then to subject that body to continuous punishment. This is why I take a little bit of license when I interpret the Annihilation of Caste. These are just the headings that you see from all the major chapters. It's on a nice website that the Columbia, I think, Archives put up to take some of the main principles out of the 26 chapters of the Annihilation of Caste and bring us closer to what Ambedkar is saying. What we learned yesterday from Dr. Thorat is that if you do not look at the very social structure of Hinduism, you can look at some beliefs, maybe you can look at the rites, and you can glorify the artworks and the history of the civilization, and some of you may travel to India and you're glorified and you're amazed by this diversity. It's a sensuous experience to